What I have with me today is the 2021 Hyundai Palisade, and if you've been following the channel at all, you'll know that we are very familiar with this vehicle. We covered it in 2018 at the Detroit Auto Show when it debuted. We went out to Idaho and drove it around the mountains in Coeur d'Alene for the press launch with the Hyundai team, and now I have something a little bit different. The reason that we have this vehicle today and we're reviewing it again is because we have the all-important calligraphy trim. As tested, this vehicle is over $50,000, and today we're going to see whether or not it's worth it. So let's jump in. Okay, so let's start with what this thing is. Now, back in 2018, this debuted as a new vehicle. However, this was not the first time that Hyundai brought a three-row SUV. They've made the Veracruz in the past and they had the Santa Fe XL up until when they launched the Palisade in 2018. However, when they brought this thing, they pretty much took over the three-row SUV game along with its sister vehicle, the Telluride. We'll get to why over the course of the video, but let's keep in mind the price tag. So at 50 grand as tested, this is the most expensive Hyundai you can buy. That's because you have the all-important calligraphy trim. And if you think that name sounds uppity, I'll direct your attention to things like the Range Rover Autobiography or the Volvo Inscription. Regardless of what you think of the name, we're here to find out if it's worth the money. So let's start behind the wheel. Powering this Palisade is a 3.8-liter naturally aspirated V6 engine, which has no turbos and it has no hybrid option. And that kind of begs the question of why? Because this is the same company that's dumping millions and millions into R&D for fuel cell with their Nexo. And while this vehicle in its naturally aspirated 6 only makes 291 horsepower, flick it into sport, put your foot down, and you can feel it. Now, this engine does make an attempt to be efficient in the sense that it runs on an Atkinson cycle, but on the highway don't expect anything over 26 miles per gallon. Now, power is decent, and it gets to the ground with H-Track all-wheel drive, and that traction is especially helpful in these Wisconsin winters. However, it's not the power that's the most compelling thing behind the wheel of this car, and the most compelling thing is actually the dynamics. Now, this reminds me of my time back in Idaho a couple years ago when I went and did the initial testing with this thing out in the twisty mountain roads of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It shocked me how well this thing rotated for what it is. This thing has an incredibly neutral sense of balance. The chassis is incredibly well balanced. The suspension and the damping is fantastic. It's not too stiff and too bumpy. It doesn't beat you up like a BMW SUV might. And it's still, stiff enough to get you around a corner. And then it's still super comfortable on the streets. So it's nice to drive, but what's it like to look at? Interior perspective, this has always kind of been the weak link for me in terms of the Palisade. It's always kind of looked like a rectangle that got stung by a bee. And sure, they make some interesting design aesthetic choices with the whole waterfall running lights, and they're the first to really kind of pull that off, looking at you, Jeep Cherokee. However, they've made some very important updates for the 2021 and specifically for the calligraphy trim. Now, that being this little detail here, where the LED waterfall doesn't just go from the upper housing to the lower housing, but it has a small little detail in between there. It's that little tininess that kind of justifies and says, yeah, I'm worth 50 grand. Now, additionally, the most important thing for me is the wheels. The wheel update to this year, to this trim, can make or break the vehicle aesthetic. Now, for me, this is a $50,000 vehicle, and now it finally has $50,000 wheels to match. They've also updated the spoking on the grille and made little tweaks here and there, and while it may not be a huge change, it's one that goes a long way with me. Now that brings us to the interior, which is arguably, especially for this segment, the most important thing. And this, on the interior, is where you really start to see your money go to work for you. The quilted leather on the seats is matched by the door panels. Any plastics are textured so as to not feel cheap, and the speaker covers look like something you'd find in Gatsby's mansion. Now, I've tested pretty much every other vehicle in this segment. As a matter of fact, next week we have a Highlander versus Palisade video coming to the channel, and you'll see firsthand what I'm talking about. But if you weren't convinced from that, may I draw you to the headliner. Now, this headliner is bathed in the softest micro suede. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I would kill to have lining my sweatpants and my hoodies. The materials are good, but so is the technology. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto work perfectly, wireless charging is in your center bin, but most importantly, the Hyundai Kia driver assist systems are second only to Tesla. Okay, so yeah, the front seat, it's covered in all sorts of nice materials and trimmings, and the aluminums are great, and the leather is quilted, but what about the back seat? I mean, you bought a 3-row SUV because presumably you're gonna wanna put people back here. Rear passengers are treated to their own sunroof, the same quilted and piped seats, their own climate controls, USB-C chargers, and a PA system so they can hear the driver. Now this brings us to the most important and biggest selling feature of the Palisade, and this isn't particularly exclusive to the Calligraphy or any other trim of the Palisade. However, the most important thing here is this is a 3-row family SUV, and this is one of the only, if not the only, 3rd row that adults, full-size adults, can fit comfortably back there for more than 5 minutes. That's a big win for the Palisade, big win for Hyundai. So let's jump outside and talk final thoughts. We've been throwing around and kind of fixating and focusing and obsessing over this idea of, is it worth 50 grand? And I think that number 50 is important because, well, it's a pretty round number, and it's a pretty expensive number, especially for something that doesn't carry the luxury moniker. Now, based on everything that I've seen and everything that I've felt with my week with this Palisade, especially in the Calligraphy trim, it is by all accounts worth every single penny that you will pay for it. It drives phenomenally, especially for considering what it is. It looks, finally, with these wheels and updated details, it actually looks like it costs $50,000. The interior is by any stretch comparable to what you would find in, let's say, an Audi or a Mercedes of today. And it's incredibly practical. The tech is good. Hyundai's driver assist system is fantastic. So this still, even over 50 grand, let's consider that the Ford Explorer Platinum is 55 grand. You can option up a VW Atlas for over 50 grand. So this isn't like it's the only one topping this number. So by all accounts, this still represents the best value to me in this segment. So if you're even considering this thing and you have a family, just buy it. With that, thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Sin City's cold and empty, no one's around to judge me. When you're gone, I say, I'm drowning in the Highlanders and Palisades.